This week we're going to have a look at something a bit different. We're going to have a look at some different watches from the early part of the 20th century that I think are really interesting milestones in seeing how the wristwatch case evolved, and I guess how we went from pocket watches that were worn in a pocket to a watch that was worn on the wrist in the form that we think of it today. At Mr. Jones Watches, we see ourselves as part of a much longer tradition of watchmaking in this country, and particularly watchmaking in the capital, in London, where we're based. Just to, I guess, set the scene at the start, this is a man's pocket watch from 1889. So this in 1889 is what would have been thought of as a watch for a man. It's quite a heavy item, it's in a silver case, and it's absolutely not designed to be worn on the wrist. It's designed to be worn in a little pocket on your waistcoat, and it has this chain on it that you can in turn fit through a little loop in the waistcoat as a kind of security device to prevent it being pickpocketed. The watch has this sort of ring at the top which is called the bow, which allows you to fit the chain to it, and the part of the case that comes up to meet the crown and the bow is called the pendant. So this was a watch for a man. There were slightly smaller versions that were aimed at women that are known as fob watches, but the form of them is essentially the same. So you've got the pendant, the bow and the crown. The only difference in this case is that the 12 o'clock marker is at right angles to the pendant, something that we'll be touching on in a bit when we come to look at the early wristwatches. Wristwatch wearing really emerged amongst British Army officers who were serving in India and the northern frontier in the years between about 1885 and 1887. I think generally they were cavalry mounted officers, so they would have been on horseback, so you can imagine how inconvenient it would be to reach into your pocket to check the time if you're trying to hold the reins of your horse. So they had this challenge of, well, how do you go from a pocket watch to something you can strap to your body? The solution they came up with is this sort of leather cup holder. So this leather cup holds one of the slightly smaller ladies' size fob watches, and it wraps around the wrist like it's got a buckle and strap, just like a contemporary watch. So it straps around, and yeah, it allows you to wear your wrist in quite a secure way. Wear your watch in quite a secure way on your wrist. You can see in the centre, it solved their problem, and I guess for British Army officers who weren't so concerned with the appearance of things, perhaps it was a satisfactory solution. I would say for most people though, it's created a very sort of bulky item to wear on the wrist. Like, you can see how proud of the wrist the cup holder sits. Like, it's quite a thing to be wearing. You can't easily forget that you're wearing your watch. I guess other people sort of looked at that and thought there could be a more elegant way of fixing the fob-sized watch to the wrist. So this is kind of the solution that was more widely adopted, which was to solder a short length of wire onto the case and then either feed a strap, like a leather strap, through it, or, as in the case on this one, have a metal strap that hooked into that. This is a watch that is hallmarked for 1900, although when the conversion actually happened is obviously uncertain, so it was probably converted at a later date to be a wristwatch. It was certainly a lady's fob watch originally, and one of the telltale signs for that is it still has the flip-up lid on the front that would have been completely impractical on a wristwatch, and indeed I'm surprised that whoever converted it left the spring in place, because it would have been easy to catch the crown on something and accidentally flip the cover open. But the conversion's been done in quite a sophisticated way. So the pendant has been shortened and the crown has been replaced with a much smaller one. So it doesn't have like a big protuberance on the side that makes it look clumsy. So in contrast is this fob watch conversion, where it's got a very long pendant still on it. So it's still got the hole where you could fit the bow to in order to fit your chain to secure your watch. but it's still got the original crown, and it generally just looks quite crude and clunky. They followed the same method of attaching the strap to it as before, so the short length of wire soldered on. But I would say this is quite an unsuccessful conversion for another reason. They've used a fob watch where the 12 o'clock marker is in line with the pendant and crown. So when it's on the wrist, that's what we would think of as 3 o'clock. So in order to read the time, you've got to kind of, I guess, look at your wrist, but look at it kind of that way around rather than that way that would be the more conventional way. So you've got to read the time in that direction. I have another example of a watch where it's clearly using a fob watch movement, but this is a slightly more sophisticated conversion. So in this case, there's been a different dial made, so the 12 o'clock is at right angles to the pendant, but it betrays its origins because the sub-seconds is in line with the pendant. But I guess that's not a huge inconvenience really, like to have the seconds there rather than at 6 o'clock. It just looks maybe a little bit less symmetrical. This watch is also an example of the limitations of that short sort of length of wire soldered onto the case to attach the strap. So there's clearly been repairs on this watch, and you can see, I think the bottom length of wire is now too short, which is why it's being pulled into this slightly strange angle. One of the first firms that really started thinking about the lug and the watch case as a new thing, I would argue, was Longines, the famous Swiss company. So in 1907, they registered a design for this sort of articulated lug style that they developed. So this is a watch that's actually hallmarked for 1912, so a few years after that design was registered. But all of the early Longines wristwatches have this form of lug, and it gives them quite a distinctive appearance. And I would say it's a much more successful design and way of attaching the strap than the short length of wire. Another example of a firm that was thinking about the lug and how that was going to work in a kind of integrated way is called Williamson. So Williamson were an English maker of wristwatches, and Williamson were really aiming at a lower price point section of the market. So their solution is not quite as well engineered or constructed as Longines. They've basically got this small piece of silver with a tube soldered onto it that then the length of wire is applied to. But still, it's starting. You can see there's the start of the wristwatch looking like something different from the pocket watch. Almost the last watch we're going to look at is made by an English firm called Rotherham's. So Rotherham's made quite high quality wristwatches, and this is a watch of theirs that dates to 1931. And you can see on this, the lug is actually now a kind of its own element, and it's not just like a length of wire that's looped around on itself. It's actually got some shape to it. It's much skinnier, like in profile, than a lug would be on a wristwatch. But you can kind of see from this how, yeah, the wristwatch case is going to evolve, and it kind of sets what's to come. It's kind of interesting to compare. So this is Rotherham's, made in 1931 in England, which is about as late as their English-made wristwatches get. They had a partnership with a Swiss factory as well, and this is a watch from Rotherham's Swiss output, which has, and I would say must be more or less contemporary with that Paris-cased watch, so early 1930s. But you can see immediately, like, the lug shape is followed through and has become much more what we would think of as a kind of watch case today. Like, you can see the two side by side. I mean, disregarding the slight difference in size of the watches, you can see they both have that sort of curved lug shape going on. And I'm not making a case that Rotherham's evolved the wristwatch case as we think of it today. I think there are a whole load of firms who were working on some very similar things. Okay, that's all for this week. I hope it was interesting looking at something a bit different, looking back at the kind of the history of the wristwatch, and I hope it's been insightful for some people out there. As I say, I'm always up for learning more about this subject and for people who are smarter than me to educate me. So feel free to add comments down below if you have a different understanding of the evolution of the wristwatch, and I'll love to read them.